Hello, readers. Welcome to Literary Journeys with River. Today, I bring you a summary of The Assassin and the Empire, the fifth story in The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. This exciting chapter is crucial for understanding the dark and dangerous world surrounding Celaena Sardothien before diving into the Throne of Glass series. Remember, this is just a summary, not the full book. So if you want all the details, don't forget to read the book. Let's get started. Celaena Sardothien, huddled in a corner of the prisoner cart, stared apathetically at the play of light and shadows projected on the wooden walls. Outside, the trees were starting to change colors as if watching her through the barred window. Although her body was alert to every creak of the carriage and the sound of the shackles on her wrists and ankles, her mind was trapped in an overwhelming silence. This silence seemed to envelop her completely, making the sensations of thirst, hunger, and cold feel distant, almost unreal. The abrupt movement of the cart as it hit a bump made her head strike the wall, but even that pain felt remote, as if it didn't belong to her. The spots of light filtering into the cart seemed to dance like falling snow or like ashes from a destroyed world. She could imagine the taste of those ashes on her dry lips, settling on her heavy tongue, reminding her of the chaos and destruction that surrounded her. In the silence she so preferred, one unsettling question arose, threatening to shatter that forced calm. Had she caused all of this? The cart passed under a thick canopy of trees that briefly extinguished the light, and in that darkness, the silence broke, allowing the question to take root deep in her mind. And then, in the twilight, the memories began to surface. 11 days earlier, Chapter 1. Celaena Sardothien had been waiting for this night for a year. Sitting in a wooden hallway of the Royal Theatre, she let herself be enveloped by the music rising from the orchestra. Her legs dangled over the edge of the railing as she leaned forward to rest her cheek on her crossed arms. The musicians formed a semicircle on the stage, filling the theater with a sound that sometimes made her forget to breathe. She had seen this symphony 4 times in recent years, always accompanied by Arobynn, making it their autumn tradition. Despite knowing she shouldn't, her gaze drifted to the private box where she used to sit and saw Arobynn with Lysandra. The young courtesan's presence at his side wasn't just an emotional slap in the face, but a painful reminder of betrayal. Arobynn knew what this night meant to Celaena, and yet he had brought Lysandra, as if her presence didn't matter. Although the music was as beautiful as ever, Celaena felt distant from it. She had come alone this time, having told Sam she had other plans. The freedom she had gained by separating from Arobynn came at a cost, and loneliness weighed more heavily on this occasion. The third movement of the symphony ended, and applause echoed in the Golden Dome. Celaena watched Arobynn in the box, his figure relaxed as he draped his arm over the back of Lysandra's seat, and she wondered how much longer she would remain the assassin of a darling. As the symphony reached its climax, she realized she could no longer enjoy it as she once did. She stood up, and with the music still enveloping her, walked out to the rooftop. It was nearly midnight when Celaena arrived at her apartment. She had spent the last month decorating it to her liking, enjoying the freedom of finally living in a place that was hers, though she shared it with Sam. However, upon entering, she found a note from him on the table. "I'm out. Don't wait up." Celaena knew all too well where Sam had gone and why he didn't want her to see him when he returned. Annoyed, she crumpled the note and left the apartment. Her destination was the Satanos, a place in the slums where underground fights attracted the worst of Rifthold. Upon arrival, she saw Sam in the arena, fighting against a giant. Though Sam was clearly superior, the brutality of the place and the possibility of something going wrong infuriated her. Sam won the fight decisively, raising his arms in triumph as the crowd cheered. Celaena, watching from a distance, felt a mixture of pride and anger. She didn't understand why he risked his life for a bit of money when they already had enough to live on. Later, as they walked back home, Celaena confronted Sam, scolding him for his recklessness. He calmly replied that they needed more money if they wanted to start a new life away from Rifthold. But the idea of leaving the city, though tempting, filled her with doubts. Could they really break away from Arobynn and the Assassin's Guild? She knew that to do so, they would need Arobynn's blessing, or else face dangerous consequences. Back at the apartment, the tension between them didn't dissipate. Though they shared a home and a life together, the shadow of Arobynn still loomed over them. The conversation about their future was interrupted when Sam, with a loving gesture, tried to ease the tension between them. However, even in that moment of intimacy, one question lingered in both of their minds. Would Arobynn Hamel let them leave? Chapter 2. The next day, Celaena Sardothien and Sam Cortland entered the Assassin's Keep, and everything seemed the same. The same housekeeper, as nervous as ever, greeted them before disappearing, and Wesley, Arobynn's guard, stood firm as usual in front of the King of Assassins' study. As they walked towards the door, Celaena observed Wesley closely, his weapons, the tension in his muscles, his alert eyes. She knew that if things went awry, Wesley would be a formidable opponent. Sam, however, didn't lose his manners and greeted Wesley with a handshake, to which the bodyguard responded with a slight smile, commenting on Sam's bruise, before casting a challenging look at Celaena. Wesley had never been kind to her, and his attitude confirmed that he had always seen the eventual confrontation between Celaena and Arobynn coming. She, unfazed, responded with sarcasm before entering the study. Arobynn awaited them with a calculated smile. His hands clasped on the desk, he radiated a dangerous calm. As they sat down, both Celaena and Sam remembered the last time they had been together in that room, a night that ended in a brutal beating at Arobynn's hands. It was a bitter memory, the night Sam had vowed to kill Arobynn for what he did to Celaena. With tension in the air, Celaena was the first to speak. She informed Arobynn that they planned to leave Rifthold and wanted to leave the guild to start their own business in another city, assuring him that they wouldn't compete with him. Arobynn, with an enigmatic smile, evaded her proposal with trivial questions, inquiring about their new life. Sam, increasingly enraged by Arobynn's attitude, restrained himself only because of Celaena's intervention, who kept the conversation on neutral ground. But when Arobynn made an excessive counterproposal, demanding a sum of money that would leave them penniless, Sam exploded. Celaena, controlling the tremor in her hands, accepted the offer, aware that they couldn't afford to lose the opportunity to leave the guild. Arobynn, satisfied with his victory, gave them his blessing to leave. Outside the keep, Sam, filled with rage, reproached Celaena for accepting without consulting him. Walking through the bustling commercial district, Sam insisted they should find another way to pay, but Celaena defended her decision, prioritizing long-term safety over money. Though Sam remained upset, they parted ways, with him seeking to clear his head, while she continued walking alone through the city. The day, bright and crisp, led her to the glass castle, a place she usually avoided. From a distance, she contemplated the majestic structure that represented everything she hated about the kingdom of Adarlan. The decisions made within those walls had changed the course of history, and thinking of the king provoked a visceral fear in her. However, she knew that her problems with Arobynn and Sam paled in comparison to the dark shadow that castle cast over the continent. By nightfall, Sam returned to the apartment with a proposal that would change their lives. He had found a lucrative but dangerous contract to eliminate Yoan Jane, the crime lord of Rifthold, and his right-hand man, Rourke Farron. Though Celaena recognized the risk, Sam was determined. He knew that this mission would provide them with the money needed to leave the city and start anew elsewhere on the continent. The conversation quickly turned into a promise for the future, and what began as a discussion ended in an expression of love and desire. As they kissed, the bond between them grew stronger, making the dangers and sacrifices seem worth it if it meant being together. However, one doubt lingered. Was it wise to take on such a risky contract? Celaena knew she needed time to reflect, but Sam, with his enthusiasm and determination, was pulling her towards an uncertain fate. As they embraced, both aware that the future was uncertain, the hope of finding peace and freedom kept them together. Chapter 3. The golden morning light filtered into the room, enveloping Sam in a glow that made his hair shine like bronze. Celaena, lying beside him, watched as he slept, his bare chest still carrying the summer's bronze hue, marked by scars that told stories of battles and training. Gently, she traced her finger along his back, mapping out his life, each scar a reminder of what they had been through. Celaena didn't want him to accumulate more scars. She wished for him a better life, far from the shadows of death and violence. She dreamed of a future where they could leave their swords behind and live in peace, though she knew that day was still far off. When Sam woke up, he smiled at Celaena, a smile that made her heart ache. She was willing to give up her life as an assassin for him, but first, they had to complete one last mission: eliminate Jane and Farron. Celaena, always strategic, explained her plan. They should take out Farron first, Jane second, to destabilize the organization before attacking the leader. Though Sam was still half asleep, he nodded as she outlined each step with precision. He knew that together they could do it, but a part of her longed for more than just the death of their enemies. She longed for a different life. After a quick breakfast and a visit to the bank that left them nearly broke after paying a large sum to Arobynn, they spent the day gathering information on Yo and Jane. His house, an imposing 3-story building on one of Rifthold's prettiest streets, was heavily guarded. Jane's spies were everywhere: children in the streets, prostitutes in the basements, and even some city guards. As they passed by the house, they saw Farron exit through the door. His presence was imposing, with his expensive clothes and calculated stride. Farron had risen from the slums to become Jane's second-in-command, leaving a trail of corpses in his wake. When their eyes met, Celaena felt a shiver. Farron smiled at her, a smile devoid of humanity that only confirmed his sadistic nature. For the first time, Celaena felt a dark desire to see Farron's smile fade when he learned she had killed Jane. Sam, aware of the danger, decided it would be best to handle Farron alone, leaving Celaena out of direct action. Though they argued about it, Sam insisted, wanting to protect her from the monster that was Farron. Celaena, reluctantly, agreed to the plan, allowing Sam to take the lead in this part of the mission. Later, Celaena attended her weekly dance class with Madame Florine, a stern instructor who accepted nothing less than perfection. Despite the class's harshness, Celaena enjoyed the dance, which provided her with flexibility and grace. After the class, exhausted but satisfied, she returned to her apartment, reflecting on what she was willing to sacrifice for Sam. Despite her love for Rifthold and its comforts, she knew she would be willing to leave it all behind for him. Upon arriving at her apartment, she found a disturbing surprise. Arobynn Hamel was sitting on her sofa, waiting for her with a smile that promised nothing good. Chapter 4. In the kitchen, alone with her thoughts, Celaena tried to calm the trembling in her hands as she poured herself a cup of tea. Arobynn's unexpected presence in her home deeply unsettled her. How long had he been there? Had he gone through her belongings? Trying to maintain her composure, she prepared another cup for Arobynn and, with the cups in hand, returned to the living room where he seemed perfectly comfortable, as if that house were his. With the afternoon light reflecting in his cold gray eyes, Arobynn began to question the wisdom of Celaena and Sam's plan to eliminate Ioan Jane and Rourke Farron. Despite Arobynn's warnings about the danger of facing those men, Celaena remained firm, rejecting any attempt at manipulation by him. When Arobynn tried to destabilize her emotionally by insinuating that she wasn't invincible and might be making a fatal mistake, Celaena stood her ground. Even when he tried to sow doubt about Sam, suggesting that perhaps he hadn't told her everything about his past, she remained steadfast, demanding that he leave her home. Arobynn, in a final attempt to control her, confessed, with a mix of vulnerability and manipulation, that he adored her and that everything he had done was out of fear of losing her. But Celaena, remembering all the past betrayals, wasn't swayed by his words, and with a silent but clear warning, forced him to leave. Later that night, Celaena and Sam went to dine at the Black Swan Tavern, a lively place filled with music and laughter. Though Sam shared all the information he had gathered about Farron and Jane, Celaena remained distracted, tormented by Arobynn's visit. Back at her apartment, the place felt contaminated, as if it no longer belonged to her after Arobynn's intrusion. With her mind in turmoil and exhaustion weighing on her, Celaena decided she was ready for the day to end and prepared for bed. Sam noticed her silence and asked if something was wrong. Though Celaena tried to downplay it, the weight of everything that had happened pushed her to confess that she was tired. As she unbuttoned her robe in front of the mirror, she wondered if she would ever be able to share her deepest fears with Sam. When he asked her to tell him her darkest secret, Celaena, after hesitating, confessed that deep down, she had always been a coward, full of fear. Sam, with tenderness and understanding, shared his own method of facing fear, repeating his name to remind himself not to be afraid. Sam's honesty and vulnerability moved her deeply, and though her fears persisted, Sam's presence and love offered her a refuge, at least for that night. Chapter 5. Rourke Farron was a very busy man. Celaena and Sam confirmed this when, the next morning, they positioned themselves a block away from Jane's house, dressed in inconspicuous clothes and cloaks that concealed their faces. Farron appeared before dawn, and they followed him through the city as he made a series of stops at banks, restaurants, taverns, brothels, and even the black market. What surprised them was the unexpected visit to a bookstore, not to intimidate the owner, but to buy adventure novels, the same ones Celaena had read and enjoyed. The idea that Farron shared that taste deeply disturbed her, as if that small pleasure was also tainted by his darkness. As the day progressed, it became clear that Farron moved through the city with reckless arrogance, without escorts to protect him. Sam would have no trouble taking him out the next night. When the sun began to paint the sky with golden hues, Farron arrived at the Satanos, a nightmarish place owned by Jane. From a distance, Celaena and Sam watched cautiously. They decided to follow him inside, a grim space filled with worn wooden tables and a fighting pit, where slaves cleaned up the blood from the night's battles. Farron met with Helmson, the master of ceremonies, while the place was deserted, save for a few drunks and prostitutes resting in rooms barely covered by tattered curtains. Celaena's desire to destroy the Satanos grew as she saw the miserable conditions of the slaves and prostitutes. The idea of razing everything, leaving only ashes as a testament to the wrath of the assassin of a darling, consumed her. As they watched Farron inspect the girls with a cold, calculating gaze, the atmosphere was thick with terror. The tension was palpable when a guard dragged a chained prisoner toward Farron. The man, a fighter from the Satanos, begged for his life, but Farron, with a sadistic smile, led him to a hidden door, a clear sign that brutal torture awaited him. Soon after, the man's screams echoed throughout the place, screams of such intense pain that they sounded more animal than human. Celaena, though equally horrified, knew it wasn't the time to act. They needed to get out of there. Sam, visibly affected, had to be convinced to leave, but finally agreed. As they walked away, the screams continued, another testament to Farron's sadism. Instead of returning home immediately, Sam insisted on going to a park along the Avery River. Sitting on a bench, Sam removed his hood and, with his hands covering his face, whispered that they were not like Farron. Though both knew how to torture and kill, they didn't enjoy it. That was the crucial difference. However, Sam confessed that sometimes there was a part of him that found satisfaction in making those who deserved it suffer, a part that disgusted him. Celaena comforted him, reminding him that they had always maintained a limit, that they would never cross the line that separated people like them from monsters like Farron. Though fear and doubt persisted, they knew they could choose a different path. Sam, with his head on her shoulder, wondered if they would be punished for their actions when they died, and Celaena, with a mix of resignation and humor, replied that the gods wouldn't know what to do with them. That night, back at their apartment, they both planned the attack on Farron. Sam went over escape routes on a map, while Celaena sharpened the daggers she would carry with her. They had decided that the ideal moment to strike would be when Farron was most tired, just after completing his daily errands. Sam, equipped with a special suit and several weapons, would handle everything. But during the preparation, an unexpected argument arose. Sam had obtained tickets for a ship that would take them to the southern continent, far from Adarlan and, more importantly, far from Arobynn. Celaena, surprised by Sam's unilateral decision, resisted the idea of leaving the continent she knew. The argument escalated when Sam mentioned that Arobynn had confronted him that day, suggesting that Celaena hadn't been completely honest about her past. Sam, however, assured her that he didn't care, that he was patiently waiting for the day when she would trust him enough to tell him the truth. In the end, Celaena, overwhelmed by the intensity of the conversation and Sam's sincere affection, accepted the possibility of starting over in a distant place. Though the idea of moving to the southern continent terrified her, the love and trust she felt for Sam gave her the strength to face the unknown. Sam, with a mix of pride and affection, reassured her, and for a moment, the future seemed promising. Celaena, still nervous, tried to repeat Sam's mantra, "My name is Celaena Sardothien, and I will not be afraid," seeking the same conviction he had. With Sam's support, who embraced her tenderly, she knew they could find their place, even if it meant leaving everything behind. Chapter 6. The night dragged on with exasperating slowness. The clock above the fireplace seemed stuck at 9, with each minute stretching indefinitely. Celaena had tried to distract herself for the past 2 hours, but nothing could hold her attention, neither the cards, nor reading a romance novel, nor even the atlas of the southern continent. Not even the sweets she had hidden from Sam in the kitchen could ease her anxiety. She should have been organizing her belongings, preparing to leave, but even the task of packing felt unbearable. Sam, aware of her reluctance, had left the trunks empty at her disposal before heading out to complete his mission, to eliminate Rourke Farron. Though Celaena knew she should start packing, she felt trapped by a strange paralysis. That morning, she had contacted a lawyer to arrange the sale of the apartment, and though he warned her it could be a complicated process, she felt relieved to know she could handle the paperwork from a distance. Even so, the idea of leaving behind the place she had called home overwhelmed her. The clock moved again. 1 more minute. Sam might need hours to find the right moment to strike Farron, or perhaps he had already done so and was now hiding, making sure no one followed him home. Despite the uncertainty, Celaena checked the weapons she had nearby, making sure everything was in place, preparing for any eventuality. With a sigh, she stood up and walked to the bookshelf. If she was going to move to the southern continent, she couldn't leave her books behind, so she began packing them carefully in the nearest trunk as the clock struck 11. Finally, Celaena's patience ran out. Sam should have returned by now, and though there was still an hour before the agreed-upon time for her to go out looking for him, the unease drove her to take action. With her special suit and several additional weapons, she ran towards Jane's house. The streets were quiet, barely interrupted by the furtive glances of prostitutes, barefoot orphans, and citizens struggling to make a living. As she ran, Celaena listened intently, searching for any sign that Farron had been killed, but found nothing. As she approached the wealthy area where Jane lived, her pace slowed. Wealthy couples returning from the theater strolled without concern, with no indication that anything was wrong. Jane's house, well-lit, seemed almost festive, with bored guards at their posts. Celaena made a circuit around the places where Sam might have been, but found no trace of him, no signs of a struggle or blood. The possibility that they had crossed paths on the way slightly reassured her. Perhaps Sam was already back home. With a sigh, she decided to return, hoping to find him there and wishing that everything had gone according to plan. Chapter 7. Celaena returned to the apartment in the middle of the night, but Sam wasn't there. The clock above the fireplace read 1 in the morning, filling her with uncertainty. Trying to convince herself that perhaps she had read it wrong, she checked her own pocket watch, but the time was the same. With growing unease, she stood by the fireplace, adding more logs to the fire and removing her weapons, though she didn't take off her suit. As time passed, her worry intensified until, without realizing it, she began pacing back and forth, waiting for Sam to return. When the clock struck 4 in the morning, Celaena woke with a start on the sofa, not remembering when she had fallen asleep. Hoping that Sam had hidden in the assassin's keep after killing Rourke Farron, she tried to calm herself. However, the worry wouldn't let her rest, so she decided to go out and search for him. She ran through the slums and then through the wealthier districts, checking every corner, every shadow, every rooftop, without finding any trace of him. When she reached the river, her fear turned into paralyzing anguish as she walked along the riverbank, dreading to find something that would confirm her worst fears. With despair taking hold of her, she continued, convinced that Sam would be waiting for her at home, ready to laugh at her worry and then plan their escape together, far from everything. As time passed, it reached noon, though it seemed impossible that so much time had gone by. She climbed the stairs to the apartment with heavy steps, feeling that something had changed irrevocably. Upon reaching the final step, she found the apartment door ajar. Panic gripped her, and she ran inside, ready to yell at Sam for worrying her so much. However, instead of Sam, she found Arobynn Hamel, sitting on her sofa. The look in the King of Assassins' eyes said everything before he even opened his mouth. When he finally whispered a simple "I'm sorry," the silence engulfed her like a crushing wave, changing everything. Chapter 8. Celaena's body began to move instinctively, heading toward the fireplace before she could process what was happening. Arobynn was there, speaking to her in a grave whisper, explaining that the culprits had believed Sam still lived in the keep and had left him as a message. In response, she grabbed the clock from the mantel and, without thinking twice, hurled it with all her might against the wall, shattering it into 1,000 pieces along with the decorative plates and a silver tea set. As she watched the fragments scattered across the floor, the void inside her deepened. In a voice she barely recognized as her own, she demanded to see the body. Arobynn, with a sad expression, tried to refuse, warning her that it wasn't what she wanted. But Celaena, consumed by desperation, repeated her demand, baring her teeth in a furious gesture. Arobynn, resigned, shook his head, knowing he couldn't stop her. Celaena left the apartment, descending the stairs in a state of disbelief. The city streets seemed normal, the sky clear and the breeze from the Avery River tousling her hair, but none of it made sense. She clung to the irrational hope that Arobynn was wrong, that Sam wasn't dead. Arobynn followed closely, with Wesley ever vigilant, keeping a short distance. As they crossed the city, the noise of everyday life faded in and out of her senses, as if the real world was beyond her reach. When they arrived at the Assassin's Keep, Celaena paid no attention to the furious and pained looks from the assassins who watched her. She pushed forward, guided by Arobynn toward the dungeons, where the darkest truths awaited her. Each step echoed off the stone, bringing her closer to the place she most feared. When they finally reached the morgue door, Arobynn tried to stop her once more, pleading with her not to enter. But Celaena, with cold and desolate determination, pushed him aside and crossed the threshold. The small room, barely lit by 2 torches, revealed the mutilated body on the table. Each step she took toward Sam showed her new horrors: the twisted fingers, the deep wounds, the face that, despite everything, she still recognized. The world beneath her feet wavered, but she forced herself to move forward. She couldn't accept what her eyes were seeing, couldn't believe that he, her Sam, had been subjected to such torture. The horror of what Farron had done was too much for her, and she finally vomited on the floor. Arobynn gently tried to lead her away, but the shock of reality left her paralyzed. Sam was dead, in a way that no mind could conceive without breaking. Yet Celaena couldn't allow Sam to be left alone in that dark and cold place. She slipped from Arobynn's grasp and, with devastating tenderness, removed her cloak to cover Sam's shattered body. Then, she climbed onto the table, curling up next to him, holding him as if she could protect him from the pain he had already suffered. She could still smell Sam, mixed with a strange scent that didn't belong to him and made her want to vomit again. Despite everything, she decided she wouldn't leave him, that she would stay there with him. When Arobynn left, closing the door behind him, Celaena closed her eyes, reaffirming her decision. She wouldn't leave. She wouldn't leave. Chapter 9. Celaena awoke in a bed that, though it had once been hers, no longer felt like it. Something crucial was missing from her life, and the emptiness was unbearable. Still half asleep, it took her a moment to realize what had changed. Sam was gone. As this cruel reality dawned on her, she felt the world closing in around her, and the desire to remain motionless in bed, numb to the pain, took hold. As the hours passed, daylight crept into the room, marking the passage of time. Celaena, however, didn't want to be part of a world where Sam no longer existed. She felt powerless, and the memory of Sam began to fade, his eyes, his laughter, his voice saying her name as if it were something special. She stayed in bed, watching the light move across the wall, determined not to participate in a world that had lost its meaning. Later, she was roused by the murmur of male voices outside her room. She recognized the voices of Harding and Tern, 2 assassins from the Keep, discussing how to attack Jane and Farron. Arobynn led the conversation, organizing a plan of vengeance for that very night. Arobynn had decided they would attack Farron's house, planning to kill both men while they slept, though the difficulties of the assault were obvious. The conversation sparked in Celaena a faint desire to participate, but the fatigue and pain kept her immobile. When Arobynn entered the room to see her, she pretended to sleep. He approached, gently stroking her hair, but as he left, he locked the door from the outside, leaving her imprisoned. This betrayal ignited a spark in Celaena, a fury that slowly propelled her to action. She knew Arobynn had locked her in to prevent her from seeking revenge on her own, depriving her of the right to claim every drop of blood for what they had done to Sam. Determined not to be stopped, Celaena got out of bed, her mind poisoned by rage. Though the door was locked, the window offered a possible escape, even if the fall from the second floor was dangerous. Ignoring the risk, she dressed in what was available, black tunics and boots. Though her main weapons were gone, she knew where she had hidden some daggers and swords years ago. She armed herself with what she could find, preparing for battle. Celaena opened the window and, after ensuring the guards weren't watching, began to climb down the wall, using the white stones of the facade to support herself. Her stealth kept her hidden as she slipped to the ground, and once there, she moved toward the stables, where the shadows covered her. But before she could continue, Wesley, one of Arobynn's assassins, caught her, furious at her attempt to escape. Despite the dagger Celaena pressed to his throat, Wesley tried to reason with her, begging her not to rush into this. However, Celaena's blinding fury drove her to strike him, knocking him unconscious with a blow to the head. Without wasting time, she vaulted over the fence and dashed into the streets, running with the speed and determination of an unstoppable force. Her path led her to Jane and Farron's house, her final destination. She knew the only way to enter without alerting the guards was through a window on the second floor, a strategy mentioned by Harding. She climbed onto a nearby rooftop and ran to the edge, measuring the distance with precision as fury fueled her every move. There was no room for fear or doubt, only the certainty that her vengeance was about to be fulfilled. With the alley opening below her, Celaena reached the edge of the roof and jumped, determined to complete her mission or die trying. Chapter 10. The cold night air struck Celaena's face as she flew toward the open window. With the shine of the wet streets and the moonlight illuminating her entrance, she braced for impact, ready to draw her daggers. She tore through the curtains as she passed, landing on the floor and rolling to a stop in an occupied meeting room. In front of her, Jane, Farron, and several other men stared at her, surrounded by a dozen guards already forming a defensive wall. In a single instant, Celaena realized she had walked into a trap. The heavy curtains had created the illusion of darkness and emptiness inside the room, concealing the meeting. But the betrayal didn't matter. She was determined to kill everyone present. In a swift motion, she threw the daggers from her boots, hitting two guards and smiling cruelly at the sound of their dying screams. She unsheathed her swords just as the first guard lunged at her, dying instantly from a thrust to the heart. Each enemy was an obstacle she eliminated with deadly precision. Spinning toward the next guard, her gaze locked on Jane and Farron across the table. Farron smiled at her with gleaming eyes, while Jane, stunned, stood with his mouth agape. In one fluid movement, Celaena threw a dagger that lodged in Jane's throat, unleashing chaos in the room. The guards continued to pour in, but now they wore strange black masks that covered their faces. As Celaena closed in on Farron, a familiar smoke began to fill the room, clouding her vision and burning her lungs. She recognized the musky scent, the same she had smelled on Sam's corpse. Seeing Farron don a mask, she knew the smoke was no accident. It was part of the trap. As the smoke enveloped her, her strength began to wane, but she clung to her last dagger, determined to reach him. However, the poison in the smoke, which she now knew was Gloriella, began to paralyze her. Her body no longer responded. A guard struck her in the abdomen, followed by another blow to the face, making her stagger. Each hit pushed her further into unconsciousness, while Farron watched with a satisfied smile. She realized too late that it had all been a calculated ruse. The open window, the smoke, the masks, everything had been planned to capture her. As she fell to the ground, darkness claimed her. She woke in the same room but was now immobile, sitting against the wall, her weapons stripped away. The fresh air had returned to the room, but Celaena couldn't feel it. She barely managed to open her eyes, enough to see Farron crouched before her, smiling with delight. His dark gray clothes were immaculate, in contrast to the blood and corpses surrounding her. Farron began to speak, his tone cruel and mocking. He confessed that it had all been a trap designed to make her fall, exploiting her love for Sam or her desire for revenge. Mentioning the Gloriella, he explained how he had used the same poison on Sam, leaving her paralyzed but conscious. As Farron spoke, Celaena's despair grew, realizing that he planned to deliver her to the king as a bribe, securing his power. As Farron caressed her face and threatened her with more pain, Celaena struggled against the paralysis, trying to move even a single finger. She knew Arobynn would arrive soon, but she couldn't rely on that. Anger and hatred boiled inside her, but her body wouldn't respond. Farron, noticing her panic, grabbed her by the throat, his sharp nails digging into her skin as he taunted her with more promises of suffering. In her desperation, Celaena tried to figure out who had betrayed her. She thought of Wesley, who had tried to warn her, and Harding, the assassin who had mentioned the window. Everything pointed to Harding as the traitor, though part of her refused to accept that possibility. Farron, noticing her confusion, struck her on the cheek, making her bleed. With a cruel smile, he indicated that the blow was for staining his carpet before leaving the room. 3 well-dressed men, not mere guards, approached Celaena. One of them raised his sword, and the last thing she felt before losing consciousness was the blow to her head and the darkness claiming her once more. Chapter 11. Celaena awoke in dim light, with a headache so intense that she could barely think. She kept her eyes closed, assessing her surroundings before moving. The place was cold, damp, and smelled of mold and decay. Without opening her eyes, she understood 3 things. At least 6 hours had passed, as she could now move her fingers and toes. Her captors had stripped her of all weapons, and she was in the royal dungeons or some hidden cell, waiting to be transported. And most painfully, Sam was still dead, and her rage had been manipulated into a betrayal so dark that her still aching mind couldn't comprehend it. When she finally opened her eyes, she realized she was indeed in a dungeon. Her wrists and ankles were chained to the wall and floor, limiting her movement to a small pile of rotting straw and a dirty bucket for her needs. Despite the degrading environment, Celaena didn't let herself be overcome by despair. Instead, she began to evaluate her situation. She inspected every link, every lock, searching for a weakness, but the chains were solid, made of Adarlanian steel. There were no hidden weapons or pins she could use to free herself. In her mind, her escape possibilities dwindled to an inattentive guard she could trap with the chains, but even that seemed a desperate gamble. Just then, the door creaked open, revealing a royal guard accompanied by 3 other men. The guard, dressed in a dark tunic embroidered with gold, showed no surprise at seeing her awake. He carried a tray with water, bread, and a piece of cheese, which he placed on the floor without crossing the threshold, aware of the danger of getting too close. Celaena noticed the guard's experience, his measured gestures, and understood these men weren't just anyone. She was indeed in the royal dungeons, a place from which no one escaped. If Arobynn hadn't come to rescue her, the chances of escape were growing slimmer by the moment. The guard, as if reading her thoughts, told her that the chains were impenetrable, made to hold even the most dangerous prisoners. As she drank the water and ate the tasteless bread, reality hit her hard. Sam was dead, and she, trapped in this cell, had failed to avenge him. She kicked the tray away, indifferent from desperation. Everything seemed meaningless now. There was no way to escape, and Arobynn, who had been her only hope, wasn't coming. Celaena rested her head against the cold, damp wall, feeling her world crumble. Over time, she began to catch fragments of conversations from the guards that seeped through the silence surrounding her. They spoke of her impending trial, of her identity as Celaena Sardothien, though some doubted that the young woman chained up could be the famous Adarlan's assassin. They mentioned the captain who was absent, though it was rumored he was returning to Rifthold. They talked about the trial and the execution, both scheduled to be held behind closed doors to prevent her identity from becoming public. Despite the guards' words, Celaena felt distant, as if her spirit had already left the place. The girl who had defied pirates, ridden through the Red Desert, and watched the sunrise over the Avery River no longer existed. All that remained was a chained body with no hope or purpose, while the world moved on, indifferent to her fall. The guards argued about how she would be executed, hanged or beheaded. It hardly mattered to the king. But for Celaena, trapped in darkness and despair, the end result seemed the same. In that dungeon, her world was collapsing while the echo of the guards' laughter rang in her mind, confirming the bitter truth that her life, and Sam's, had been destroyed. Chapter 12. Time passed in a blur of images for Celaena. The dark dungeons, the rotting straw beneath her body, the cold stones against her cheek, the distant conversations of the guards, and the bland bread and cheese they gave her to eat. 2 days had passed, though for her, they felt like an eternity. The guards, ever vigilant, tossed a rag and a bucket of water to her, ordering her to clean herself for the trial. Celaena, without resisting, complied. They placed shackles on her wrists and ankles, allowing her to walk, and then led her through a dark, damp corridor where distant moans could be heard. They climbed a staircase illuminated by the blinding light of the sun until they reached a stone and polished wood chamber. The wooden chair at the center of the room felt smooth beneath her aching body. The room, large but austere, was occupied only by an imposing table at the far end, where 12 men watched her intently. She didn't care who they were or what their role was. All that mattered was that everyone in that room, from the men at the table to the dozen guards, stared at her, waiting. As she sat in that chair, Celaena felt her throat close up. She knew her fate was already sealed, hanging or beheading. Guilt consumed her as she blamed herself for not protecting Sam, for allowing him to face Farron alone. Everything she had done since arriving at Skulls Bay had led her to this moment. Just as she was lost in thought, the small door at the back of the room opened, and the men at the table stood up. The guards straightened, and an air of reverence filled the room. The king of Adarlan entered, his heavy boots echoing on the floor. Celaena avoided looking at him, knowing that any remaining vestige of calm would shatter if she did. She forced herself to feel nothing, preferring apathy to despair. The king sat in the central chair at the table, surrounded by his council. The silence in the room became oppressive. The king's presence was palpable, a darkness swirling around him. With a grave and mocking voice, the king addressed her, commenting on her age and asking if Farron had caught her or if she had been willful. Celaena, deep in her pain, didn't respond. Nothing she said or did would change the fact that Sam was gone. The king, receiving no answer, ordered the charges against her to be read. Counselor Renzel, in an impersonal tone, began listing a long string of victims, the names of all the people Celaena had killed. As the counselor spoke, memories of her past as Adarlan's assassin mingled with the present reality, and she realized that everything that had once defined her would now seal her fate. The king urged her to look at him, and though she resisted at first, she finally raised her head. Seeing his face, she paled. The king's eyes were dark and voracious, and his presence was a manifestation of evil itself. When he asked if she had any last requests, Celaena, with a flicker of the girl she once was, asked that her death be swift. The defiance in her tone provoked a dangerous smile on the king's face, who denied her that mercy. Instead of a quick execution, he sentenced her to 9 life sentences of hard labor in the salt mines of Endeavere, with the instruction that she be kept alive as long as possible so that she would suffer. The sentence left her frozen. Endeavere was a brutal prison, a place where a slow death was inevitable. As the guards dragged her out of the room, Celaena, now without strength, allowed herself to be carried. They took her back to her cell for an indeterminate time before loading her onto a prison cart, where new shackles were hammered onto her wrists. As the cart moved, Celaena looked through the small window, watching as the streets of Rifthold passed by, the city where she had known so much glory and suffering. They passed by the Assassin's Keep, the place where she had been trained, where she had bled and lost so much, the place where Sam lay waiting to be buried. In the end, she had lost everything in the game of power. As the cart left the alabaster walls of the city behind, Celaena curled up in a corner, with no intention of getting up again. From the top of one of Rifthold's rooftops, Rourke Farron and Arobynn Hamel watched as the prison cart moved away from the city. Farron, the new crime lord of Rifthold, commented with surprise on the decision to send Celaena to Endeavere and wondered why Arobynn hadn't planned a spectacular rescue. Arobynn, showing no emotion, replied that he had no intention of following the cart. Farron, in his usual mocking tone, suggested that Celaena would have suffered more if she had remained under his care. Arobynn, on the other hand, coldly remarked that he simply didn't like sharing his possessions. And so, as Celaena's cart headed toward her final destination in Endeavere, the betrayal of those she had trusted became evident, leaving a void where there had once been strength and hope. After 2 days of travel in the dark and foul-smelling cart, Celaena had resigned herself to her fate. The light changed and danced on the walls, and she only moved when necessary to relieve herself or pick up the meager food they threw at her. In the solitude of her corner, the memory of Sam tormented her. She had believed she could love Sam without paying a price, but now she understood that everything in life had a cost. The journey to the salt mines of Endeavere would take 2 weeks, with each mile taking her farther north into increasingly colder weather. In her brief moments of sleep, reality and nightmares blended, leaving her unsure of what was real and what wasn't. The chills woke her constantly, and the guards offered her nothing to protect herself from the freezing weather. Each day, she felt more desolate, with only the shadows and light on the wall as her companions in that oppressive silence. Fear grew inside her, a deep fear knowing that no one survived Endeavere. Prisoners rarely lived more than a month in that death camp. With a shiver, Celaena pulled her legs to her chest, trying to contain the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. As the shadows and light continued their dance on the wall, fear gripped her heart. On the second night, Celaena heard excited whispers and the crunch of feet on dry grass. Moonlight filtered through the small barred window. Without knowing how, she found herself standing, her legs numb and aching from lack of use. She approached the window and looked outside, where the guards were gathering in a clearing in the oak-walled forest, which they had crossed since the first day of travel. Mist swirled under the moonlight, casting long, eerie shadows among the trees. It was then that she saw it, a white stag, majestic, standing among some thorny bushes. Its antlers gleamed like ivory garlands in the darkness. The Lord of the North, a sacred symbol to the people of Terrasen, was there, watching her with deep eyes. Celaena felt her breath catch, gripping the bars as the stag looked at her. The memory of a conversation with Ansel in the Red Desert resurfaced in her mind, so that the people of Terrasen always find their way home. Ansel had told her, while showing her the constellation of the stag. Seeing that sacred creature, so far from home, filled her with indescribable pain. The stag wasn't supposed to be there, not after the hunters sent by the king of Adarlan had massacred all the white stags in Terrasen 9 years ago. And yet, there it was, shining under the moonlight, a beacon in the darkness. Celaena felt the tears before she realized she was crying. The sound of bows being drawn snapped her out of her trance. The stag didn't move, and she, desperate, screamed with all her might for it to run. Her scream shattered the silence of the night into 1,000 pieces. Finally, the stag turned and ran, a flash of white light among the trees, while the guards' arrows missed one after another. As the guards' frustration boiled over, one of them struck the cart, shaking it. Celaena backed away from the window and retreated into the cart's darkness, hitting the back wall before collapsing to her knees. The silence that had enveloped her mind for days vanished, giving way to a sharp pain in her legs, in the wounds inflicted by Farron's men, and in her wrists and ankles, torn by the chains. The hole where Sam had once been was now an abyss in her heart. Fear consumed her completely, dragging her into a cold, dark void. She knew she was going to Endivere, where slavery and a slow death awaited her. Yet deep within her, as the cold and terror consumed her, something still flickered, a spark that refused to be completely extinguished. Beginning. Celaena Sardothien knew her fate was near when, after 2 weeks of travel, the trees of the oak-walled forest faded away, giving way to a gray and barren landscape. Steep, menacing mountains rose toward the sky, and in the distance, the shouts and crack of a whip announced their arrival at Endivere, the place where hopes died and lives faded like dust. Since dawn, Celaena had remained on the floor of the cart, feeling as empty as the landscape around her. She had vomited once, and now, weakened by the cold and fear, she couldn't force herself to stand. The horror of Endivere loomed over her, imminent, and the weight of losing Sam crushed her even more. A violent sob tore from her chest, so strong that she had to bite her fist to keep from being heard. She wasn't ready for Endivere. She wasn't ready to face a world without Sam. Suddenly, a fresh breeze blew into the cart, dissipating the stench of the past 2 weeks. That breeze, biting and familiar, came from the north, from Terrasen. Celaena recognized it instantly. It carried the scent of pine and snow, the echoes of lazy golden summers, and the memory of a city full of light and music at the foot of the Staghorn Mountains. That breeze reminded her of who she was and where she came from. She had to stand up. As the cart moved forward, the terrain grew more rugged, the wheels bouncing violently on the road. A whip cracked in the air, and Celaena, trembling, whispered to the floor, "My name is Celaena Sardothien," but her voice broke, choked by fear. Outside, the cries of prisoners and the change in light signaled that they were approaching an imposing wall. She took a deep breath, letting the northern wind carry away the ashes of the past, of the girl who had died alongside Sam. Now, only something new remained within her, something that still burned, a renewed strength forged in pain. Celaena opened her eyes. She knew she was entering hell, but she wouldn't let Endivere break her. She was still breathing, despite everything she had endured. She had survived Sam's death and had escaped the king's execution. She could endure this too. With determination, she got up from the floor and moved toward the small window in the cart. As she did, her eyes fell on the massive wall that loomed before them, a barrier of rock marking the entrance to Endivere. She would keep Sam's memory in her heart as a light to guide her in the darkest moments. No matter what happened, no one could take that from her. She wouldn't break. And someday, even if it cost her her last breath, she would find those responsible for Sam's death and make them pay. As the cart crossed the shadow of a tunnel under the wall, the sound of whips, screams, and chains greeted her. Celaena took in every detail with precision. Then, she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and prepared for what was to come. "My name is Celaena Sardothien," she whispered, "and I will not be afraid." The cart came to a sudden halt. The door was flung open, flooding the interior with gray light. The guards roughly pulled her out, their shadows stark against the outside light. Celaena allowed them to seize her, to guide her out of the cart. But she wouldn't be afraid. With her head held high and chin lifted, Celaena Sardothien took her first step toward the salt mines of Endivere. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Assassin and the Empire. I hope this summary has left you eager to continue exploring the Throne of Glass saga. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Share it with your fellow readers and comment below. What do you think motivated Celaena more, revenge or love? See you in the comments.